So like I mentioned before, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. And this next excerpt we are going to read also was from a Virginia slaveholder named Patrick Henry, which is the very man who became famous in our history books for declaring, "Give me liberty or give me death." Patrick Henry believed that liberty was so important that he was willing to die for that very cause again in the Revolutionary War against the British, and yet he owned slaves. So a lot of people would call our founding fathers hypocrites. A lot of people would say, well, they weren't men of virtue. In fact, they practiced this detestable concept of slavery in which they really built their farms and built their estates and built their wealth. Well, here we'll in this excerpt we discover perhaps some of the rationale and reasons for it, whether we agree with them or not. These are the words of Patrick Henry. This was written in January 18th, 1773. Is it not amazing that a time when the rights of humanity are defined and understood with precision in a country above all others fond of liberty, that in such an age and in such a country we find men professing a religion that is most humane, mild, gentle, and generous, adopting a principle as repugnant to humanity as it is inconsistent with the Bible and destructive to liberty? Every thinking, honest man rejects it in speculation. How few in practice from conscientious motives. Would anyone believe I am the master of slaves of my own purchase? I am drawn along by the general inconvenience of living here without them. I cannot justify it, however culpable my conduct. I will so far pay my devourer to virtue as to own the excellence and rectitude of her precepts, and lament my want of conformity to them. I believe a time will come when an opportunity will be offered to abolish this lamentable evil. Everything we do is to improve it. If it happens in our day, if not, let us transmit to our descendants, together with our slaves, a pity for their unhappy lot and an abhorrence of slavery. If we cannot reduce this wished-for reformation to practice, let us treat the unhappy victims with lenity. It is the furthest advance we can make toward justice. It is a debt we owe to the purity of our religion, to show that it is at variance with that law which warrants slavery. I am drawn to this line here where he says, I am drawn along by the general inconvenience of living here without them. And before we're so quick to judge these founding fathers of our nation as it pertains to equal protection under the law and liberty, I wonder what things in our own lives that we're drawn along by the general inconvenience of living without, and yet we know aren't the best for us, aren't the best practices, perhaps even not good for us, perhaps even leading astray or further away from the Lord. And it's really easy from our place to look back at these guys and say they were in the wrong. And yet their entire livelihood revolved around plantation life, revolved around slavery. It's not to justify it. In fact, they justified it and couldn't, but they did build in place a resolve to try to change it for the future. In fact, many people don't know this, George Washington, for example, also was a plantation owner, also owned slaves, and at his death, not only freed all of his slaves, but also created a foundation for all of them to get education, which is an extraordinary feat in and of itself. But our country was built on liberty, and our country was built on equal protection of the law, and that's what we're going to get into the next chapter. Some things these are some interesting notes to consider in the beginning and the founding of our country, how the founding fathers both practiced an execrable practice of owning slaves, but also knew deep down that it was wrong and that they were trying to change that for the future.